My name is Lou Agosta, and I am the host of A Rumor of Empathy. Today, my special guest is Tarun Stevenson. Tarun is a behavior management and leadership consultant in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. He is the author of The 7 Traits of Influential Leaders, which addresses the challenge of taking your leadership skills up a couple of levels, and also of Behavior Management Blueprint, 5 essential strategies for effective behavior management. Tarun started out in education, where he continues to be a force in creating calmer classrooms in schools at many levels, especially including middle school. And he has taken his behavior transformational skills in the direction of leadership coaching in what would be described as a business context. Tarun, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lou. It's so lovely to see you again, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, tell me about yourself.
Sure. So I guess that's a funny question, isn't it? I guess it depends on how far back you want to go. But for the sake of your listeners, I'll go back, say, 10 years. All right. I'm a husband. I'm a father. And about 10 years ago, I was a musician and semi-professional, recording, touring. And
But what was your instrument, if I may interrupt?
Guitar and songwriter. And so for many years, that's how I applied my craft, but it was never something that was easy to break into. And I realized with a young family, I needed to look a little bit beyond that. And so I went back to school. In my 30s, I went back to uni and got a bachelor in church ministry. I've always been around churches and church leadership, and that's how I grew up. My parents were in mission work. And so I got into that, but that's not something that you just sort of say, hey, I need a job. Once you've got that bachelor, it's not
this is
job
very provocative. I wanted to let you tell us, but I can't help resisting because
go on.
My sense is you still are in mission work. I mean, it's true. You're not bringing, in a Christian context, it's not necessarily the evangelists, but in middle school, if that's not mission, the work, how may I put it? If you're not doing the Lord's work in middle school, I wouldn't know what it would be. And there is still, in a sense, the need for transformation of the kind. Not necessarily that knock St. Paul off his horse, but there may be a couple of leaders or would-be leaders out there.
Sure. I think you raise a good point, Lou. And this is one of the challenges I had in my 30s in trying to discover myself and my voice and what my purpose in life was. For many years, I believed my purpose was to make music. And then when I found that wasn't a central tenet of what I was doing, and I then did an extension on my bachelor to become a school teacher, because I thought, I've got to pay the bills. I've got to feed my family. And, the church ministry just wasn't cutting it in that capacity, if you like. But one of the things I realized on that journey, and it wasn't an easy journey, I wasn't happy about becoming a school teacher. I wasn't happy. I thought I was being dishonest to my calling, if you like. But one of the things I discovered, and I'm glad you raised it, is that you can fulfill your purpose in many arenas, and it is not so much tied to what you do, it's the heart with which you do it. And the thing that I began to realize in school as a school teacher early on, I was working in low socioeconomic schools, a lot of challenging behavior, a lot of children that came from families that had immense challenges in life. And one of the things I realized is what I cared about was helping people. Whether I was playing music, whether I was working in church ministry, whether I was working in a school, I cared about helping people be the best they could be. And I realized that I could do that in any arena. I could do that in a school. I can do that in a church. I can do that in a corporation. And so when I was able to refocus, if you like, the way that I viewed myself, I found I was able to become more effective in a range of different areas. And that, of course, I mean, we'll get into it, but that led me to becoming a consultant with schools in behavior management. Then I moved into the business world, consulting with businesses in leadership. And now I'm actually back in church leadership, and I'm also leading a church. So I've come full circle in many ways and come back to my first passion. But at the same time, I've along the way been able to pick up a number of other areas where I can influence and make change.
Well, you made reference there. You made reference there to the transition out of it. So you're this musician, and sensibly enough, you're seeing this is really a high bar, and it's not paying the bills, and you wanna provide for your family. A bold statement of the obvious. That's a very good thing to do. And so you go back to school, and and get into teaching, and you're not sure. Like, I'm going to try to give you back what you just told me, that this is who you authentically are. But here you are, in any case, you can make a living. The need for it is great. And you start out as a teacher, and you started as a beginning, I'm guessing, but I believe from reading some of your biographical stuff, as a middle school teacher. You specialized
that's
in
right.
that. And so here you are in middle school, and you're starting out. And I actually kind of know the answer because I was looking at some of your videos on YouTube, but I'm going to pretend that I don't know because the audience doesn't know. What was that like? So here you are, you're probably young and idealistic, or at least, relatively young and very idealistic. What happened?
Well, look, you're right. I was very idealistic. I'm a fourth generation teacher. My great grandfather was a school teacher. My grandmother was a teacher. My mother was a teacher for 40 years. And so in part, I saw this as, look, I should be good at this. This is in my blood. But when I got into the classroom, it was like a scene from the apocalypse. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just, I've got a story I tell, and I won't tell the whole story, but my first class I had out of university, I was very idealistic. I thought I could make a difference. I was going to be the, To Sir with Love, Sidney Poitier type, Morgan Freeman type character, which brings transformation to their community. And what I was met with was a group of grade 4 students who are, 10 to 11. I was hired because I specialized in gifted learning. And my principal told me this is a gifted class. And I had 7 to 8 kids who were high behavior needs, ranging from ADHD to autism to hearing impairments, intellectual impairments. There was really chronic learning challenges and behavior challenges in that class. And so I was drowning as a teacher. I thought, I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. And 6 months into it, my school principal called me into her office for a review. And she said, Tarun, on paper, you look like a great teacher, but in practice, I don't think you're really cut out for this. And I was shattered. I was crushed because I genuinely put everything I had into that class and felt like I was drowning. I didn't know what I was doing. I felt like a failure. And fortunately, I had a good mentor who had also been a school teacher. And he said to me, look, it takes a few years to feel confident as a teacher. What you might need to do is find a school that is a little more supportive, but don't quit teaching just yet. And so that began my journey, if you like, into trying to understand the mind and the behaviors of human beings. And I thought, if I can understand what makes these children tick and why they behave the way they behave and how I can positively influence them, then maybe I can start teaching. And so that really began a quest for me to understand behavior and become more adept in the classroom.
Well, what did you actually do? Did you go back to school yourself? I'm really actually, it's an open-ended question. Because I know at some point you took your game up a couple of levels. What, if you can, the audience and Bo, would benefit. What happened?
Sure.
If you can, it may be just like the College of Hard Knocks, but what, can you pinpoint a couple of lessons learned, if you will?
I did what any sane person would do, Lou. I went back to university and I did an honors degree in theology. And
Okay, I
and
mean,
then
turn to the Lord. I mean, we need a miracle here. I mean, I don't know.
but
Maybe, yeah.
at the same time I had to pay the bills, so I became a substitute teacher.
Okay.
And one thing, if anybody knows anything about substitute teachers, pretty much the only thing substitute teachers do is crowd control. Your job is to keep the class from rioting for 6 hours. And if you can get through the day and not have anybody dead, then you've done well. And so being a substitute teacher, I got the worst of the worst, but at the same time, I was educating myself. I was reading books. I was taking courses privately on how do you manage children in high intensity behavior situations. And so then I just started to practice in these substitute roles, because as a substitute teacher, I didn't have to worry about whether the curriculum was taught completely, whether I was assessing them, or whether they were even making the grade. The only expectation on me as a substitute was keep them under control. Mm-hmm. And so that gave me a really good opportunity to just practice behavior management in a really, I guess, focused environment. And you know what they say, practice makes perfect. And so the longer I did this, the more confident I became in managing children. And I got a routine, if you like, of how I would get through my day as a substitute. At this stage, I'm still not necessarily interested in becoming some behavior expert or anything like that. I'm just interested in getting through the day without killing somebody.
I get that. I think that needs to be emphasized.
I think so.
Notwithstanding the humorous edge to this. I mean,
Sure.
I know famous educators who have said things like that. The job here is to survive the day and get through the day. And it does seem to me, I mean, this is my phrase, not yours, but you have matriculated to some extent in the College of Hard Knocks, and notwithstanding that it is actually not a college, but a middle school. And so,
that's
right. I mean, this is what, I mean, the challenge here is to bring forth the tips and techniques. I mean, I don't even know if it can, there's no necessary easy algorithm for it to say, you've got a bunch of difficult students. Maybe it would be helpful if you could, I don't know, if you could, and without revealing anything particularly confidential, pick a case or two, or, and say what it was. I mean, some young man or woman, girl, boy or girl, is acting out and behaving however they're behaving, and somehow you get around it and set some limits and get them emotionally re-regulated or something. Yeah.
Well, what I might do, I mean, I've got some great stories, and I will go into some of those stories in a moment. What I might do, what might make this conversation helpful is if I give you a framework, and this is what I call my behavior management blueprint, and this is what I now teach in schools. And I've also adapted this behavior management blueprint for leadership and corporate settings as well, because I think the principles still apply. But I see that there are 5 keys to working in complex behavior situations, whether that's in family or whether that's in a work setting or a school setting. And the first thing is this: you need to be able to define your expectations. You need to be able to clearly state what's expected of the class and or in the workplace or of the family. And I think you talk about this also when you talk about empathy requires boundaries. If you can't set the boundaries, what ends up happening is people set their own boundaries. As human beings, we naturally have a tendency to find out the limits of our environment. And if nobody sets those limits, then we set limits that suit us. And this is true of children. This is true of adults. And so the first thing I would say is set your boundaries. What are your not negotiables? And so I have 5 rules in my classroom. The first one is you put up your hand if you want to speak. The second one is you put up your hand if you want to leave your seat. You follow instructions quickly. You make smart choices, and you keep Mr. Stevenson happy. And now I can't take credit for those rules. They're actually designed by a psychologist named Chris Biffle, and he has a very extensive work on behavior management in the classroom. But what that taught me was that if you can clearly define the boundaries for the people you're working with, what will happen is you take away the mystery. What I found out as a substitute teacher is most children will give you 5 to 10 minutes of grace at the beginning of the day. And if you can win them over in that 5 minutes, then you've got them for the rest of the day. But if you lose them in that 5 minutes, you will be fighting to get them back all day. And I think that's true of business environments too. When you meet somebody for the first time, generally speaking, you will afford them a level of courtesy that says, okay, I'm going to check you out and see what kind of person you are. If you can take that 5 minutes to establish rapport, to build trust, to set some boundaries about your interaction, then very often you can grow to develop good relationship with them.
Well, I think that's brilliant. I mean, no pressure though. I mean, you got 5 minutes, maybe 10.
That's right.
I mean,
that's right.
I mean, it does put me in mind to I mean, I don't want to bring in Malcolm Gladwell and Blink, but I mean, it's a short amount of time. And it is maybe in a way, a little bit like a critical period where the baby goose or the baby duck, when it's first born, has a narrow window of time to imprint. And it's not formal imprinting on the teacher, of course, but it does sound a tad like that. And so raise your hand. That sounds like a very powerful and important start, and make the teacher reasonably happy with your behavior. So clear expectations.
Clear expectations, so the first one. And just to take up on your point there, that establishing in the first 5 minutes, one of the things that I had to learn how to do is there was a routine that I used. It was almost like a song and dance routine. I had to make it entertaining enough and engaging enough that I would draw them in. It's a little bit like, you watch a lot of movies and TV series now. The first couple of minutes starts off with some kind of shocking or jarring scene which gets your attention.
Something dramatic.
And it's the hook, if you like. Songs are like this as well. You've got to have a hook. And I find that that's true of engaging people. You've got to have a hook from the outset that makes them want to know more. And so the journey I took them on was, I would introduce myself. I'm Mr. Stevenson. I know not everybody loves school, but I think we should try and have a great day together. I'm going to teach you 5 magic rules that will help you have a great day. They're magic because if you learn them, you're going to get along with me and we're going to all get along together. And so immediately they're hooked. They're like, oh, magic rules, getting along with a teacher. This sounds like a foreign concept. I'm in. Tell me more. And so that's how you do it. You sort of just tease it out and, okay, tell me more. So I tell them the magic rules, and there's hand actions that go with it. And this is, of course, all the Chris Biffle work that I've borrowed from. But once I get through that, then you've got the second part of behavior management is being able to follow through on those expectations. Mm-hmm. They need to know that there are consequences attached to willingness to follow or not follow. Because there's always somebody in the group, at least 5% of your group, whoever you're working with, will want to test to see how serious you are.
Test the limits.
Yeah, test the limits. And so for them, you have to, and for everyone else, you have to establish, okay, if you can't follow the expectations, this is what happens. And so for me, that's a game that I play, which is the teacher versus the class. And the teacher versus the class is really simple. When you follow the rules, the class gets points. When you don't follow the rules, Mr. Stevenson gets points. So I'm not penalizing anybody, but at the same time, I'm making it very clear I will notice and I will address behavior if it's inappropriate. Now, the consequence of letting Mr. Stevenson win is everybody stays in till the bell. And does some extra work for me. The consequence of the class winning or helping the class to win is we get 10 minutes of free time at the end of the lesson. And so they decide, like human behavior, we're always doing that decision matrix of cost versus benefit. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, what do I care more about? Do I care more about 10 minutes of free time, or do I care more about staying in and doing extra work with Mr. Stevenson? Well, guess which one the kids choose most of the time.
And it's rich in symbols too, because 10 minutes is 10 minutes. And, you love to hate the teacher. I mean, and you love to love them too on a good day. I mean,
absolutely.
So that, thank you for that. I mean, there is a behavioral component to the training.
Sure.
what impressed me also was the sensitivity to the, if you will, the acting out, for want of a better term. If a kid jumps
Mm.
up out of his seat, or I don't know what, the misbehavior speaks out of turn, or, the class clown tries to say something funny, uh,
Yeah.
and then the the ability to get behind that behavior and
Mm.
understand that the young boy or girl might be emotionally dysregulated for
Yeah.
reasons that have nothing to do with who you are, or
Yeah.
but just a break in routine can itself be deregulating for certain individuals.
Yeah.
I saw you as homing in and helping the teacher, whether
Mm.
new, old, or in between. I mean,
Mm.
to get their head around this behavior and behave in such a way to help give back to the student some of
Mm.
this emotional regulation. And to understand, I think I was reading about in some of your writings, so to understand the function of behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's such an important part of what we're talking about, is that understanding that all behavior has a point. Behavior is not the point, it's a symptom of something else. And I see it as behavior as a communication tool. They're trying to tell you something. It's your job to figure out what that is. And so if we're working with emotionally dysregulated people, as you put it, uh, you've got to take a step back and ask yourself why. Why are they doing what they're doing? Is it for attention? Are they in a mode of trying to control the situation? Is it a cry for help? Maybe they don't have words to express what's really going on in their world, or maybe there's some deeper mental health issues that are driving what's going on. And if I don't, as a person, take a step back and ask those questions, then all I'm going to do is get caught up in their emotional escalation. Because our emotions match the people we are with. If you're with a happy person, generally you feel happier about life. If you're with an angry person, well, you come away feeling angry yourself. And so in those kinds of situations, if you're not cognizant of your own emotional attachment to that person, and you don't take a step back and say, okay, what's driving this behavior, then you can get caught up in it. And I see this so often in classrooms, and even in when you talk about parenting and in marriages. Very often the conflicts that occur are because one person was discombobulated and the other person didn't take a moment to figure out why. They just bought into the emotion and they escalated together. And when it gets to that, nobody wins. Everybody loses in those sort of situations.
Well, that's a key term, distinction. That's a key distinction, escalation,
Mm.
because what we see it happens. Somebody says something and the other person reacts, and the other person reacts to the reaction, and the
Yeah.
other person reacts to the reaction. And pretty soon the dominoes start to fall, and people
Yeah.
are confronted and upset, and it starts to spin and takes on a life of its own. And
Yeah.
disentangling it is so how, I mean, so ask a question. I'm going to try,
Yeah.
yeah,
Sure.
I'll provide you a service of asking you a complete question. What is can you give me some guidance on
Yeah.
how to interrupt the process of escalation before it
Yeah.
gets going and takes on a life of its own? Is it even possible to do so? I don't want, I mean, or
Yeah.
I think it is, but can you give me some
I
guidance here?
Yeah, I think it is possible. And I think it starts with you as the individual. You have to start up here. If you can't manage your own thought processes and manage your own emotional responses to situations, then you're going to find yourself caught up in that reactive behavior very quickly. I'll give you a story because I think this will illustrate the point quite well. When I was a fairly new teacher, it was probably my second year of teaching. I came to a school in an area of Brisbane called South Logan. Now, Logan is a low socioeconomic area. Its schools are notorious for having very complex behavior needs. And I arrived at the class. It was a year 6 class, and the teacher came from next door, and she said, "Oh, you've got that class. They're the worst class in the whole school." So
Well,
you know,
talk about create a setup for success
yeah,
here.
it's like,
Yeah,
thanks,
no.
thanks very much. Here am
Yeah,
I, second year teacher. I'm
yeah,
still trying to figure myself
yeah,
out. I immediately feel the anxiety,
yeah,
you know, the emotion of the moment. I'm caught by her emotion, and I feel it, my chest tightening. In my head, I'm saying to myself, get in your car and go home. You don't need this kind of stress. And but there was something, and this is the practice that I was in the process of learning, and something in my head said, no, you'll be okay, back yourself. And so I don't know what came over me, but I said something to this teacher to try and defuse the emotional moment. I said, thanks so much for your concern, but I don't have naughty kids. I only have good kids. And I laughed. I was trying to break the tension.
sure.
She looked at me with an intense face and she said, no, I'm being serious.
Yeah,
These kids are diabolical.
yeah,
You are going to have a tough day. If you
yeah,
have trouble, send them to me. I will deal with them. You see, it's the 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 experience of that person was valid, and
yeah,
she had obviously had really difficult times with these children, but
yeah,
for her belief was everyone else is going to have the same experience. So my job to defuse that emotional moment was I had to separate myself from her emotion. I had to be able to, in my head, say, you know what, make up your own mind when you get in the classroom. Don't write these kids off before you've met them. And so I went into the class, and almost on cue, 3 girls turned up early. And I'm not making this story up. This is why I love it so much. Is these girls said, sir, are you our teacher today? I said, yes. And they said, this is the worst class in the whole school. I said, well, girls, thank you for your concern, but you got to understand something about Mr. Stevenson. I don't have naughty kids in my class. I only have good kids. We're going to have a great day today. I was trying to change the emotional tension that these kids already felt before they had walked in the class. This class knew they were the naughty class. Everybody had told them they were the naughty class. And the girls didn't believe me. They got the class photo off the wall. They brought it to me and they said, no, sir, these are the kids you need to watch out for. He doesn't listen. He doesn't do any work. He always argues. He'll wander around the classroom all day. And this one, you'll send him to the principal before lunchtime.
They're all boys
And
so far.
all
I mean,
boys, exactly. Yeah. That's right. And that's a whole other string of interest that I have in my my work, is with how boys learn. But these 5 boys were named as the troublemakers, if you like.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, thanks, girls. Let's just see how we go. Mr. Stevenson hasn't started yet. We might just have a good day. I had to regulate here. I had to manage what I was hearing and disconnect myself from it emotionally.
Yeah.
Inside, I was freaking out. I'm going to be honest. Inside, I'm saying, oh my gosh, this is going to be a disaster. But I had to do something with my thoughts and my words that changed the tension in the room. The class comes in and I start taking the roll, and I get halfway down the roll and I call Cameron, and Cameron stands up, this small boy, sandy blonde hair, and he throws his arms out in like a Jesus Christ pose, you know, from the statue in Brazil. Grand gesture, Mr. Stevenson. And all of the class stops and they look at him like he's the Messiah. And he says, Mr. Stevenson, I am the naughty boy in the classroom. And the class roared with laughter. And then they looked at me to see what kind of reaction I would get. See, they already figured out what kind of reaction I was going to give him. I was going to give him the same reaction every other substitute teacher gave him. I was going to start yelling at him and tell him to sit down. But in that moment, because I was already on a roll by this time, I tried something different. I said, Cameron, lovely to meet you, but I've only got one problem. I don't have naughty kids in the class. So you couldn't possibly be the naughty boy in the class. You must be my best boy. And I said, so let's see if we can help each other have an amazing day today. And his face crumpled up with confusion. And he said to me, no, you don't understand. I'm not being funny. I'm being serious. I am always in trouble. Every time we have a substitute teacher, I get sent to the principal's office. I said, well, Cameron, I don't know you and you don't know me. So why don't we see if we can do something different today? I'll help you have a great day if you can help me have a great day. Does that sound fair? And he sat down. It was like he had never heard anything like it. But a funny thing happened to Cameron is he spent the whole day working his butt off to make me happy. Can I be your line leader? Can I hand out worksheets? Am I having a great day, Mr. Stevenson? Am I your best student, Mr. Stevenson? Cameron desperately wanted to have somebody believe in him.
Mhm.
Cameron desperately wanted to have somebody change the narrative of his life, because as far as I could tell, every person in his world had told him, you are a naughty boy and you can't be anything else. And see, I tell that story because your original question was, well, how do we not get caught up in the emotion of the moment? You've got to be able to tell yourself a different story.
Yeah.
It's the narrative that you tell yourself, and then you need to inject that narrative into the relationship that you're dealing with. And very often people react emotionally because they are working out of a narrative that somebody has put on them. And if we can help them to see themselves differently, to see their potential differently, then all of a sudden the thing that was the problem is no longer really the problem. And then you can get down to the issue of empathy and relationship and growing together.
And even teaching long division, or I don't know,
And even,
whatever,
yeah.
whatever, pre-algebra, whatever it is that comes.
Exactly.
I must say, I am inspired, and I am inspired, full stop. And I do want to share two thoughts that I
Please.
had while you were speaking. The first thought about the teacher next door. I mean, with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, here I am, so to speak, fat, dumb, and happy on the sidelines. I don't have a tough class at all. All I have to do is have a great conversation with you. But if, if she would have said, listen, I've got your back. If the kids get out of hand, send one or two of them to me. Now that would have been genuinely helpful.
Sure.
And so maybe that's what she was trying to say. But
I think that's what she was trying to say, but at the same time, expressed it in a way that was quite negative. Yeah.
Quite not a setup for success. We wish to create, which is what you managed to do, to create a setup for success. Your narrative was, I have the students in my class, I have great classes. Well, you're naughty this, naughty that. I don't get that. We don't have naughty kids here. We have great workers, students. And I mean, and what you did was bust up a trait, I think, of human beings, of human nature, that is not a good trait, but we often live into the devaluing expectations that people have of us. If a teacher has a devaluing expectation of me as a student, one way of satisfying the teacher and getting back at him or her at the same time is to live into the devaluing expectation. And God bless you for it. I mean, you may have been the first person in a long time who busted up, this young man, Cameron, his expectation. He's living into the devaluing expectation that everybody has of him. And you powerfully break that up. And I don't think a single instance of that, I don't know, be open to a miracle, might transform a person's life. I mean, he needs that, a couple of times a week, and then it's a real turnaround situation. So I think that, this is just by way of enthusiastic agreement. And so that is part of what you do. I mean, you're, in this instance, unstoppably positive, for want of a better term, unstoppably committed to your commitment of bringing out the best in the students. And it works. It works well enough. I mean, on a good day.
It does. And look, don't be fooled. I've had plenty of bad days in the classroom, and I've had plenty of classes that I've walked away feeling like I failed miserably. So I don't want to pretend for any minute that I'm some kind of miracle worker. I'm not. I got lucky on that day, but there are some things that I learned from that process that were repeatable, and they can certainly be applied. And I would probably add to what you said just about positivity. I mean, that's something that I've had to train myself to do. I am a naturally cynical person. And when I was younger, I tended to take a fairly bleak view on life. And that affected me, and it affected my family quite negatively. And so when I was going through that process of becoming a teacher, I realized that one of the things I had to get a handle on was how I viewed life. If I took the worst case scenario as my default position, it was only going to overwhelm me, and I was not going to do well. And so I had to teach myself to look for the good, not only in situations, but look for the good in people. And sometimes you have to look hard. I mean, not everybody's easy to find good in, but if you can err on the side of believing that people are genuinely good at heart and they have an inherent value and worth that is, worth pursuing, then I think that's where you can overcome many of the emotional barriers that people throw up to protect themselves.
Well, it sounds like you did a splendid job in getting around the defensive misbehavior, emotional dysregulation, sharing one's own personal distress with the entire class. The underlying issue, or if you will, the question here, I mean, I'm not a big fan of positivity either. I couldn't think of a better word. I'm not, I'm not that wedded to it, but you did something that shifted the expectation. I mean, and it looked relatively positive. It wasn't, it wasn't in the moment. It was, it was, I use the word commitment. It was out of your commitment to education is what I get. And not merely just like Pollyannish, it's going to be rainbows and unicorns and balloons, because it's generally not. And nevertheless, I mean, you alluded earlier, just to build a bridge here to the next set of questions, I want to be sure to get around to it. I alluded earlier, the three girls came into class early and said, well, here are all of the really difficult individuals.
Yeah.
This is a class, and they were all boys.
Yeah, they're all boys.
It just was coincidentally. The girls might be difficult in a different way on a different day, and we can schedule a conversation for that, just as if for equal time. But in this particular class, they have, I mean, there is, there's truth to that too. Sometimes boys have a different way of expressing their suffering and and whatever it is they're dealing with. I mean, I'm not sure there's a specific question other than I believe from reading up on the work you've done that you've studied the particular challenges of boys of this, 10, 12, not pre-pubertal, about to hit puberty. Some of them may have hit it, about to hit it, smart enough to do some long division. Not necessarily their frontal cortex is still evolving. What can you say about the special needs of educating boys? I think this is an important subject.
Look, this is a complex subject, and I probably won't do it justice in the short time I speak about it. But I see it as there are two fundamental ways that boys, I think, differ from girls. And we probably, in our quest to be more egalitarian in our support of girls, which I think has been absolutely necessary, we have inadvertently diminished or devalued the uniqueness that boys bring to our experiences. And the two things that I allude to is, one, boys process information differently. The neuroscience behind the way boys and girls' brains are wired, they tend to process things in a siloed fashion. They tend to process it logically first, then they bring emotion into the equation, whereas girls tend to be able to process back and forth between left and right hemispheres, and tend to import emotion and relationship to their conversations and to their workings. And that changes the dynamic of the way men and women interact. This is the classic, I guess, stereotype conversation between a man and woman who are married is like, he never listens to me because he might have heard what she said, but he didn't feel what she said. But for the man, he's just processing the words coming out of her mouth. The feeling gets processed later. And so there becomes a disconnect in the way they communicate. And you see, and so in education, back to your point, is in education, what ends up happening is we tend to teach in a manner that requires context switching. It requires us to switch between creative thought and logical thought, intuitive thought and rational thought, emotional thought and factual thought. And so we have to learn how to context switch. And boys at a young age, if they're not taught how to do this, will often get stuck in their silos. They'll either get stuck in their rational, factual mind, or they'll get stuck in their creative mind, and they find it very hard to sort of context switch. And so as a result, what happens is we as teachers can sometimes make this mistake of thinking the boys are inattentive, or the boys are learning delayed, or they don't understand, or or the boys are disruptive, or they disrupt because they're trying to deflect from the reality that they haven't quite caught on to what's being said, because their context switching is not just kicked in yet. And so that's one aspect to working with boys, is you've got to learn modes of communication that actually help them to engage with you and help them to track with you. And if you don't have a different way of communicating with a boy that you do with a girl, you will find that disconnect happens. I think the second thing that we find with boys is the way they develop socially and emotionally. The influence of male role models, in particular the influence of fathers in a young boy's life, I think has been perhaps underplayed in current Western societies. And from the age of 5 to the age of 12, boys are actively looking for male role models for the simple to answer the simple question is, how do I be a man? I know I'm meant to become a man, but what does that mean? And we know that children learn by mimicking. So the most obvious way that a young child learns that is, I'm going to mimic the men in my life. Well, if there is no positive male role model in close proximity, then many a time these boys grow up with distorted or dysfunctional views of masculinity. And now we hear a lot of people talking about things like toxic masculinity, where, boys behaving badly become young men who behave badly. My take on that is, you've got a society that where almost 50% of our young men are growing up without fathers, and they have a deficit of positive role models when it's crucial. And as a result, they start stereotyping masculinity. They take their cues from movies and games and, pop stars and all of the dysfunctional stereotypes that are out there. They think that that's reality, and they start acting out of it. And so if you put those two things into a learning environment, into a school environment, what you often have is this perfect storm of challenge, where you've got boys trying to figure out who they are. There's a deficit of positive male role models, sometimes in their family, very often in their school as well, because at least in Australia, 80% of teachers are female. And so that's not to disparage female teachers. It's just to say there's not many male teachers at a middle school or elementary school level. They're mostly, and so when boys are looking for those positive male role models, where do they find them? They don't. And then they're in classrooms that are, in many ways, have been redesigned for learning that I would say is probably more suited to the way a girl's brain works. Is more suited to inquiry-based learning, or more suited to context switching. And so you find boys sitting in classes feeling like they don't know what's going on, feeling disconnected from who they are, and so they become disruptive. They use humor to deflect from the inner pain or the inner turmoil that they feel at being disconnected. And so they say stupid things in the class, or they make silly jokes, and they do things that will get them attention in negative ways, because it's all a smoke screen to hide the fact that really inside they feel like their world is, foreign, or they don't know how to behave in it. And so, look, that's probably just a snapshot of what some of the work I do around that.
It's a powerful analysis. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm sort of stepping over what you're saying.
No, go for it.
I think it's a powerful analysis of the dilemma. The way out of the labyrinth here is not obvious. I mean, it does seem to be to try to speak into the listening of the boy, the young man, to lead him back to the path of learning. And now what that looks like in particular, I mean, one has to know about it. I mean, it does actually require to fix the community at some level. I mean,
Oh, sure.
you can't just have an individual solution, although that is helpful when it
Yeah.
occurs.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
so
I think you're right. There's there's deep fractures within the way our communities are structured that do contribute to this problem,
yeah,
and they're not easy fixes. I mean,
yeah,
these are complex problems. But what I would say at a very surface level, there is probably one fix that's actually much easier than most people realize, but can have probably the most profound effect. I've found that this is the most profound way of addressing behavioral dysfunction
okay.
in people, but in particular, it is very powerful with boys, and it is simply this: developing mutually respectful, positive relationship. In the classroom, boys learn via the relationship with their teacher.
Hmm.
So what researchers have found is that if a boy has a positive relationship with his teacher, he can almost always overcome the other dysfunctions in his life.
Hmm.
If he has a negative relationship with his teacher, it doesn't matter how good the teacher is, you can't get him to learn. His ability to learn is tied to his relationships. And I would say that that's true of men as as these young boys grow, they look for relationships that will affirm them. And if they don't find the right affirming relationships, then they find affirmation in dysfunctional environments. Why are gangs predominantly attract boys?
Because
Because
they give you
boys,
recognition and
that's
acknowledgement.
right.
Yeah,
Boys desperately want to be affirmed, and they want to be
yeah.
part of something that makes them feel
Yeah, it's the wrong
important.
kind. It's off the rails. But
Of course it is.
in the short term, it's a kind of recognition of
But
self-esteem.
and so if you use that analogy there, if
Yeah,
you can give a boy or a young man a place where they feel like they belong, where they feel like they're important, where they feel like they can contribute something of value to the world, well, very often you'll be able to overcome many of the other dysfunctions that
mm,
come with them.
mm,
And so I think at the most simple level, if you go for relationship, if you go for mutually respectful relationship,
yeah.
all of the other stuff you can overcome.
That's very powerful I and concise, and there's a lot to be unpacked there. Uh,
Mm,
and I'm going to keep the conversation moving forward because I
please.
do want to turn at least for another. We have at least a good 10 minutes left
Okay.
on the clock. I'm going to quote you to yourself because
Okay.
one of the interesting things you've done is take some of the lessons learned with difficult individuals in the classroom and in middle school and apply it to difficult customers, difficult teams, difficult individuals in the business world. Let me see if I get this quote right. I've been doing some background. At some point, I teach a course on difficult people. Difficult people are a fact of life. You'd say something to the effect, sometimes I'm a difficult people. Not mere conflict, but somebody who is actively working against you. Uh, 300 Facebook pages dealing with a narcissist. Um, and then the segue is that, pardon me, um, how, you then take this training, tips and
Mm.
techniques, and deep dive into emotional dysregulation, distress tolerance, and self-soothing, and apply it to business teams and teams in the corporate world.
Yeah.
So this is an open-ended request to say
Yeah.
more about how you came to do this.
Well,
And yeah,
how I came to do it was really, I found myself in a situation where I was trying to be a more effective leader. And, in my church setting and in my school, I was trying to understand better how to lead. And I kept bumping into difficult people, people who either wouldn't cooperate with me, couldn't see the world the way that I wanted to see it, and wouldn't go with me productively. And it was frustrating, because I thought, I can lead something, but if it wasn't for people, I'd be all right.
Thank
And
you. I'm sorry.
it's,
Perfect. I mean, yeah, I got it.
you
I
know,
mean, yeah, I got it.
but so part of it was the journey of me trying to
Yeah.
figure out how to be a more effective leader myself. But what I started to realize is, as I started to develop this skill set with managing children, I started to realize that, hang on a second, many of the dysfunctions we see in adults are just carryovers from their childhood. You know, people still crave relationship when they're adults. People still get hurt and operate out of their hurt and their dysfunction as adults. And so if I can learn to set boundaries for the people I work with, help them to know my expectations, follow through in a mutually respectful way, and develop positive, strong relationships with these people, then maybe, just maybe, they might come to the party and start cooperating and working with me. And as it turned out, as I was started working with schools, coaching teachers in behavior management, many a time the principal would in jest say to me, do you have any courses on how to manage difficult teachers?
Mm-hmm.
And the light bulb went on, and I thought, I wonder if we could take what we've learned here and transplant it into the leadership world. And so that's really where I've been working at the moment. I still do my behavior management teaching in schools, but I've also been branching out into corporate and business and education sectors, where I work with their leaders as well on how to manage conflict and how to manage difficult people in those kinds of environments.
Very powerful. And I think, you know, the cliche, I mean, I can't resist the cliche. It turns out I'm talking with a grown up, or I'm, and who is it that's talking? Is it my
Yeah.
inner 8-year-old, my inner 10-year-old? I mean,
Yes.
you know, grown up men have father hunger, and are, and it and don't realize it, and it's running their lives, and in some cases not in a positive way. Um,
Yeah.
and so this is
Yeah.
just by way of agreement. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, it's almost, I mean, it's like almost a Jungian cliche, but it's the inner child that lives
Yeah.
on in us, who we may, at least on a good day, try to distinguish, because nobody wants
Yeah.
to be actually called a child. It doesn't land
No,
right.
no.
But we have to bring
But I
that
think
forward.
there's something powerful about recognizing that,
Yeah.
though. You know, when you have enough self-awareness to say, actually, you know what, the way I've been behaving is more like my teenage self rather than the 45-year-old that I am. You know, I was sitting with a good friend last night, and just we were talking through some of the challenges he was having, and I said something to him. You know, I just made a statement about what he was processing, and it was like a light bulb went on, and he said, oh my gosh, I'm behaving like a child. You know, he had that realization that the behavior was coming from a place of dysfunction that really harked back to his childhood. And you know, I think we're all like that. If we're honest with ourselves, we all have moments when that inner child becomes the, you know, the driving and gets in the driver's seat.
Well,
And
I want the openness of the child. I want to be have a
yeah,
beginner. I want to have a beginner's mind, and
yeah,
accept and tolerant and take guidance. But I less positive. So that's positive, but less positive
yeah,
is a temper tantrum, right?
yeah,
I would say that that's
absolutely.
the inner child. There is like,
Yeah,
if I can't get my way, I mean, I
yeah,
don't stamp my feet a lot,
no,
or at all. Nevertheless, there are trade-offs, and I think the challenge is to integrate. I mean, part of the coaching and part of the guidance and part of the leadership training that you do. I mean, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but it seems to me to lead people in the direction of their better selves. And
sure.
one of the things you do say, so I'll continue quoting you to yourself. You're
Yeah.
writing and talking about great leaders. I quote, have control over their emotions. Great leaders have control over their emotions. What one what can one do? But I mean, so okay, great, I got that. And there, you know, when I don't have control over my emotions, things can rapidly go off the rails. We were talking earlier about escalation. The
Yep.
dominoes start falling. It takes on a life of its own. There's breakdowns in communication. When that occurs, agree, we need control over emotions. How can I gain that? or
Yeah.
regain that when it is at risk of being lost? Any guidance for
Sure.
us in that regard?
Look, I think one of the things that really helped me, and look, if there's a neuroscientist listening to me, they might say I've got this all wrong, but this is how I understand emotions and the way my brain works, or the way our brains work. And it seems to bear out in practice. We have the amygdala, which is our instinctive part of our brain: fight, flight, freeze. Those, classic reactionary stances that usually put us into some kind of conflict. The fight, flight, or freeze responses are controlled by emotional impulses. The problem with emotions, and this is what the light bulb moment for me was, is emotions don't have language. Emotions feel, but they don't necessarily think. I feel sad, I feel happy, I feel angry, I feel scared, and based on my feeling, I will trigger a self-defense mechanism. I'm going to get ready to fight, I'm going to run away, or I'm going to shut down.
Yeah.
Now, we see this in the animal kingdom. An antelope feels fear when the lion appears and it runs. It has that deep emotional and instinctive connection. Dogs do this. Probably one of the things that distinguishes human beings is we have another faculty that enables us to observe our emotions and to process the data that's driving that emotion. And that's our prefrontal cortex. And that process there is where I think we can really gain control of and manage our emotions. Is learn to tell yourself better stories about your emotions. What we normally do is we tell ourselves stories based on how we feel, rather than telling your emotions a different story. Because somebody didn't invite you to a party, if you're an emotionally unregulated person, you may tell your story, everybody hates me, I'm a loser, nobody wants to be my friend. You could, on the other hand, with your prefrontal cortex, tell yourself a different story. Well, maybe they didn't invite you because they had a number limit because of COVID. Maybe they just forgot, and they didn't mean to leave you out, but they just got busy and they just forgot. Well, all of a sudden, the story changes the way you feel about the situation. And if you can change the way you feel about the situation, you're less likely to trigger the instinctive responses of getting ready to fight or run away. And so one of the things, and I said this at the beginning about attitude and positivity and mindset, really that's the storytelling mechanism.
Yeah.
You have to be able to tell yourself a story in those times when you feel anxious, scared, angry, frustrated. Tell yourself a different story, and you will find that your emotion changes, and therefore your reaction will change with it.
I think that's very important and very powerful. It is the narratives that we tell ourselves that powerfully affect many of the results that we get in a wide variety of situations. And your narrative has been one of expanding learning, expanding education, expanding the power that kids, young boys and girls in middle school have over their education, and taking that into the corporate world, into teams, building teams that work, really getting teamwork done, and in a context where leaders get a chance to examine what it is that the women and men in the leadership role are doing. Where do you see yourself going from here? I mean, just riff on it. I mean, you've got a lot of plates spinning in the air. What's next for Tarun Stevenson? What would you, it's clear you're a significant contribution individually in the community. Where do you want to take this call it a project of not just calmer classrooms, but calmer teams, more effective teams, businesses that work for the stakeholders and the customers both? Where are you all going?
Look, I'm going in a few different directions at the moment.
Well, that's okay.
Sometimes I feel a little bit split in my Karma Classrooms and and my leadership development consulting has, because of COVID, we've really moved online significantly. So I've converted a lot of my live trainings into video courses, and because I still have people inquiring about the training, but I can't get out there. And so recently we've just released Understanding and Educating Boys. We've got a Behavior Management Essentials course. I've also got a Leading for Success Mastery course where I teach leaders on managing behavior and dysfunctional team members as well. So there's a number of online courses that we're focusing on. I'm writing a book at the moment, so hoping to get that out.
Working title, would you share the working title with the listening audience?
Working title. I'm actually writing parallel books. I'm writing one for education, one for leadership, because they use the same concept. So Karma Classrooms is the one for education, and the other one is Karma Leadership, and how to lead difficult people without losing it. And so that's
just a time frame. I mean, I won't hold you to it. Well, when should we look for finding
time
this
frame
on our favorite online bookseller?
Look, in an ideal world, I'd like to have it out before the end of the year. But, there's nothing ideal about this year, so who knows?
There are a number of jokes which we won't go to at this point.
No, that's right. That's right.
Well,
but, look, I'll definitely keep you posted once it's
I appreciate that. I mean, that's about all the time we have for today, Tarun. A rumor of empathy is no rumor. In the work Tarun Stevenson is doing, empathy lives in the work you're doing, Tarun, in the calmer classrooms, calmer teams, calmer leadership, and expanding authentic leadership. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Lou. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Signing off.